It was the end of the day on a Friday. I was just about to lock up the AV room. Now, we didn't really have AV classes back then, or video production like we usually call them today, but the equipment was basically for a small but very dedicated group of guys who were really excited about learning how to use it. Back then, I just had this group of senior boys who didn't need to take a first period class, but they still came in every morning for a quote unquote study hall that we used as an unofficial AV class. Even by 81, we were on to VHS. A VCR didn't cost $1,000 anymore. So I was surprised to see that somebody had left a 16mm film canister on a shelf by the door that Friday. We didn't get a whole lot of funding back then, so I knew every piece of equipment, film, and tape we had in there. The canister didn't have any label on it, but Celia Merode. I didn't know if that was a student. I thought it might have been a place, or I'd heard of a professor in town with that name. Maybe it was one of his lectures, but I was hoping it was more interesting than that. After I finally got it spooled onto the projector, I watched it at least a dozen times before going home for the weekend. For Monday morning, I decided to show it to my study hall students. Our room was tiny, an old janitor's closet, really. Today's administrators would never let me use it as a classroom, but we made do. We had 5 chairs facing the screen. The projector was on the other side of the room, probably not even 10 feet from the screen. I turned off the lights and hit the projector switch. The film opened immediately with a portrait shot of a girl. It was shot in black and white. The girl appeared to be wearing either a shawl or something that looked like a monk's cloak. She had a neutral expression on her face, not happy, not sad, but not in between either. She didn't seem content like the Mona Lisa. It was just this blank look, and she kept staring somewhere over our right shoulders. It took me those dozen viewings to see that it actually happened simultaneously. I thought for sure that one must start to happen before the other, but the artist timed it perfectly. While the girl slowly began to smile, slowly, very slowly, her face turned brighter shades of yellow. Just the face. Somebody must have hand-painted the individual film cells like some of the earliest movies from the turn of the century. After a few seconds, she had a very melodramatic smile, showing her teeth, her tongue. It was a huge smile. Then she began again really slowly. She began to frown, and the color of her face ripened into darker shades of blue. It was a very overwrought frown. And this changed every 10 seconds or so. There was a new emotion and a new color. When I first turned on the projector, I heard a couple students mumble that it was a Celia. After the first viewing, Bill turned to me and he said, "That's Celia Merode. She's a junior here." "She's a student here?" I was even more intrigued. I wanted to know if she'd actually made this thing by herself. It would have taken hours upon hours to hand paint each of those individual frames. And to do it so well. We watched it again. I'd even done some research to give the guys a little impromptu lesson on how early films were colorized. Most films before sound were colorized to some extent. Crews of artists hand-painted each frame with aniline dyes that were just haunting in how they managed to be vibrant and washed out all at the same time. Mostly women did the painting because people believed that their little hands were nimbler for the task. This Celia Merode girl must have been an absolute surgeon to hand paint 16mm film. The women who painted them at the turn of the century were working with 35mm film, so their tiny canvas was twice as big. 16mm is like painting on a canvas as narrow as my thumbnail. We watched Celia become red with anger. Then our door flung open and light poured in and shocked us out of the film. Everyone turned to see who just blinded us. To our surprise, it was the same girl who was then red with rage on the screen. She looked the same in real life. Bill said, "Whoa, this is pretty surreal." Celia gawked at the screen, then she turned to the projector, then back at the screen. She was purple now, but seemed relieved in real life. She said, "Oh, thank God." She was still panting, like she had just run across the entire school. After she caught her breath, she watched the film end and she turned to our class. She had her arms crossed and she glared at us and she asked, "So do you like it or what?"